Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of HR and Payroll 2.0. I'm Pete Tiliakis, and as always, I'm joined by the legendary Julie Fernandez. Julie, how are you?
I'm doing great today. Thanks, Pete.
Good, good. Look, we have an exciting episode again. We're going to be talking HR transformation today. But first, we wanted to get into some interesting news. We've got a handful of updates here that I think are interesting to share. And one that you found in the benefits world, Julie, that I think I totally missed. So would love to get you to get us started on that one today.
Yeah, for sure. And as you know, I'm super excited about bringing news at the front of these podcasts because if I had a place where I could reliably hear all of the news that maybe I missed, I'd be there every single week. So,
Yes.
so let's dive in. As you mentioned, the find that I have for us today is in the benefits technology and outsourcing space with provider B-Swift, who is currently owned by CVS Health. And it looks like Francisco Partners, which is an investment firm, has stated its intent to acquire them. And I did a little bit of digging here just because when it comes to B-Swift, they were acquired by Aetna in 2014. And that was back, if you remember, when healthcare exchanges were, kind of bursting at the seams.
Yeah.
And so B-Swift, Aetna was interested in them for the private exchange business. And then a few years later in 2018, CVS Health acquired Aetna. And so they ended up with B-Swift. And now Francisco Partners, who's a growth-oriented investment firm, is looking to acquire them. There's been, as you know, lots of activity here in technology and HR spaces. What I wanted to share and maybe see what you know about Francisco Partners is,
Yeah.
kind of where they are. I find them mostly in technology and healthcare as their space. Do you remember the IBM Watson Health business?
I do.
Yeah, it's now called
Yeah.
Meritive, and that was a divisional carve out. On the healthcare side, I noted, GoodRx is part of their portfolio now. More
Yes.
on the technology and software side, though, we see like Boomi and PayScale, which is compensation data, Digital Currency Group, which I know you're a fintech fan, right?
Yep.
So, there's, I would say, heavy technology focus,
Yes.
but technology plus healthcare coming out of Francisco Partners.
Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, and maybe we'll see those things get together, right? Watson and B Swift. It's yeah, it would be interesting. But yeah,
Right?
no, benefits is super important today, right? That sort of goes without saying. I think it's another big expense for most employers. Right next to pay and comp. And really it's confusing and complicated today. And I think it's great. There's a lot of opportunity here for disruption still in that space. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Francisco Partners seems like a good home for this solution. And maybe, who knows, maybe some of those other portfolio pieces and parts will come together to form something bigger.
Yeah.
But yeah, really interesting stuff.
And
I'm glad you pointed this one out because I had missed that one.
sure. And for
Yeah.
anyone that's, that is familiar with B-Swift, or B-Swift is the provider, expected close by the end of the year. And B-Swift clients, should know, since it's fall and it's open enrollment time, that they've stated they're remaining laser focused on enrollment and services to existing clients. So not to worry is the message that they're pumping out as all this is happening. And then
Yes.
I
Good
think
timing.
you had something that was not in the benefits space, right?
Yeah, I have a few things here to update everyone on. So first off, yeah, more non-HCM firms pulling their way or inching their way, I guess you could say, being pulled into the workplace tech marketplace. Calendly, the platform that many of us use in the workplace to schedule appointments with people externally, has acquired a recruiting operations platform provider called Prelude. I'm not terribly familiar with Prelude, but it looks like what they're really trying to do is bring their technology to the recruiting world, or pull the recruiting capability, I guess, closer to them, and really aiming for creating a scheduling platform that's focused on offering sort of a holistic external scheduling solution. So really, have in the past maybe been B2B, and now it seems like maybe they're getting more B2E in some ways and more focused on the individual. So certainly expect them to develop more use cases around this, and we'll certainly keep an eye on it. But I love it. I really do like when and we've seen a lot of this, right, with Microsoft or Facebook and others getting into the workplace tech world. And I think it's good, right? Brings a little bit of outside in thinking, some big tech thinking, and certainly some deep pockets to innovate, if you will. That's the important part here, is the innovation. And I think more and more, right, workplace tech is rich. We've seen a lot of investment going on in the space, and I think that more organizations are looking to figure out how they can tap into some of that. So yeah, we'll keep an eye on this one, but very interesting stuff there.
Yeah, can't wait to see this one from, like you said, a backwards perspective here. Usually it's the recruiting firms, and we're watching how they're improving their scheduling platforms. And so, thanks for bringing this one up. This will be a fun one to watch.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And then I have another one in the compliance space, right? Compliance is huge nowadays. These things are coming, kind of hot and heavy. Every day it's something different, but pay equity focused this time. California becomes the largest, and it seems like about the 20th state or so to begin requiring salary information on their job ads for all companies with more than 15 employees. So that's quite a swath of employers, if you will. And certainly, right, begins to open up that transparency for job ads, something that, maybe a step in the right direction for pay equity. I think it also opens up a bit of a can of worms for employers who now may have to, balance that with their internal employees, right, that they already have. If they're out there sort of showing these salary ranges, they better hope it's in line with the folks that they've already acquired or engaged in their talent pool. So, yeah, interesting, right? Good stuff in one way, but I think it creates a bit of challenge. But what are your thoughts on this? Do you think this is good, difficult, or how do you feel about it?
Yeah, well, I love your perspective on new employees maybe seeing the job ad salaries, because my first reaction is, I don't mind maybe some of the pay equity or disclosure on job ads as much as I do the conversations, that start to talk about pay equity and disclosure for existing employees. That just feels like a big hornet's nest to me. So on a job ad, okay, fine. Or at least a range. I'm imagining maybe folks will show a range if that's an option. That to me is a little less problematic. But I was also shocked at the, down to 15 employees, which is, even far lower than the ERISA 50 employee threshold. And so, like you said, like who doesn't this apply to when you start to look at 15 employees? And I imagine out of the 20 states or so, everybody's got their own threshold and their own rules. And now we're getting into the same kind of craziness that leave administration has, where it varies from state to state and place to place. Just crazy.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I mean, I think it's good. You're right. It is good for that transparency, but it does open up a can of worms. And and I think we're going to see more of this, right? I think more states are going to get on board, and I think you could see maybe even a federal requirement at some point, possibly, especially with the way ESG has become. Your environmental social governance sort of trend is going to where there's a lot more pressure being put on at least publicly traded companies to be more transparent about how they're treating the environment and employees and people and suppliers. And so I think we're going to see more of this, and I think that it's a step in the right direction, but maybe it's not perfect, right? There's going to be some things we're going to have to do to make sure we actually do make pay equitable for people. But I think it is at least a step that way. So good stuff. Good stuff.
Great catch. Yeah. Great catch.
Yeah. And I always say, right, we compliance is, it's painful today. It's very, very hot and heavy. It's good to be in the business of compliance. I know I work in that world for payroll, but there is help out there, to get these things dealt with, and expect to see more, right? I think we're definitely going to see more and more compliance coming down the pipe. So, okay. Sure. Time to get into our subject. And this week's subject is HR transformation, right? What does it actually mean anymore? That word gets thrown around a lot. We as analysts say it, advisors say it. And really, a lot of firms are out there on this path seeking the elusive HR transformation, right? Transformed HR. I like to say more lately, HR modernization. I feel like it's a little bit more, I feel like HR transformation is a little bit overused and a little nebulous. And I thought that's what we could do today, is maybe dig into this a little bit about, what is the meaning? What does it mean when we say HR transformation? What does it look like? What does it feel like? It's funny when I have interviewed organizations who have set out on these programs, a lot of times they will make the comment to me when we're interviewing them, I don't feel transformed. And it's hard to tell them what it should feel like, but we can certainly talk about what it will look like. Right. And I think that's what we aim to do. So I thought, Julie, we could start by maybe just with the definition,
Yeah,
if you will,
great.
if we could start there, and then maybe we could just go from there. I found Gartner has a really good definition that I thought we could start from, right? And they define HR transformation as the evolution of the HR function such that service delivery, talent, and technology are seamlessly adapted and integrated into HR strategy to create greater business value by driving both operational excellence and strategic impact. Sounds good, right? That's pretty much what you're aiming for, right? You're really taking, I love the word evolve there, evolution. You're evolving the way you practice and do things to something greater, something more, future forward, future ready, if you will, much more agile. And hopefully that is integrated across both your strategy and your business, right? I think that's key. But what are your thoughts on this definition? How do you feel about it? How would you define it from your perspective and your experience?
Yeah, so I mean, who wouldn't look to a lot of those components that Gartner called out? But I feel like there might be an element that I want to make sure that I raise as well. Everyone looks to kind of the redesign of the HR function and to the betterment, right? But I feel like the transformation is supposed to be dramatic and not incremental.
Oh,
That it's
yeah.
supposed to be, a broad thing, and that's what separates it from being an HR project. An HR transformation is a much bigger initiative, and you can look at it even just from the mechanics of it, where an HR project to deploy a technology or to do any of those things individually might need a project management office or a PMO, whereas a
Mm-hmm.
transformation is much broader and it captures a lot more stakeholders, and requires a transformation management office, which is an much more overarching type of a thing. Now, I'm not sure that that's always how folks are using the word transform, right? I do
Mm-hmm.
believe that it's being exchanged and used oftentimes and applied to maybe a very large project.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. No, that's an interesting take. And I mean, what do you think? I mean, it's hard to say what HR transformation should feel like, right? I think it should look, saying what it looks like means is what we've described, right? Technology driven, right? Seamlessly integrated. HR and the business are working very closely together to execute on strategy for the business and helping them perform and giving them that agility. But what do you feel like it really ought to provide exactly? Can you speak to that a little bit? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, for sure. Again, as I'm thinking of it as a more dramatic or a broader type of a change, I feel
Mm-hmm.
like reinvention at the core, right, is kind of important, and looking for major shifts in mindsets and roles and capabilities, and of course in the digital enablers. That's where
Yeah.
folks tend to focus, and maybe that's why many people step back from whatever it is that they're working on and say, I'm not sure I feel transformed, because it isn't as dramatic or as broad reaching as it should be. When I think about how it feels, it should feel disruptive. And yet we've been so disrupted in recent years, whether you talk about disruption from the pandemic or politics, that I think there's a real opportunity to feel it settled by this, and settled into something new and different. It's maybe supposed to be a little bit unrecognizable compared to wherever you came from before, but unrecognizably better.
Yeah.
Is kind of the feel part of it for me.
Yeah,
um,
yeah. I think sometimes that feeling is and I dig into a bit of quantitative and qualitative discussions in my past as an analyst, and I even now, right, I do some surveys in my current role, and one of the things it seems like is organizations, and I think they make this mistake of thinking, oh, if I buy fill in the blank best whatever, HCM, payroll, whatever the technology is, that if I put that in, that's it, right? I'm good. We should be transformed as a result. And I think
right.
that's a mistake, because there's really a bit of work you have to do around that. And we can unpack that a little bit more, but I think that's where that word evolution comes in for me, is evolving yourself to use that technology as a vehicle to take you to something different. But I think a lot of firms underestimate the importance of that technology being just a vehicle and enabling that better practice and enabling that transformation and that disruptive change. But I think sometimes they fail to actually adapt. And I think what happens is they end up, going through this, sort of going through the motions, if you will, putting in the technology, not really doing the work on the back end or even the front end, because I think that's very important too. And then ultimately being a bit disappointed. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
there's, yeah, that's interesting stuff. We could actually probably unpack this part of it, for a while, to be honest. But so maybe, Julie, you could help me understand, or help our audience understand, like, where do you even start, right? I think you certainly have to have a clear goal of where you're trying to get to. You need a strategy, you need buy-in and all that. But where do you begin to figure out how to transform and how to get going and how to get that buy-in?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of being practical when it comes to not only where to start, but where you go. And I think that when you're thinking about big wholesale changes, you need to balance the vision, which has to be a little bit agile and change with the times and move around to adapt as necessary. You need to balance that with the small stuff that's got to work together to actually make progress toward the transformation vision. And for me, that usually begins with a roadmap.
Yep.
Having a roadmap, which is going to be multidimensional, there's going to be, it's not a project plan, it's a roadmap, because there are many different factions and different aspects that will have their own paths within the roadmap, and also because it's kind of ever changing for the priorities and destinations. And so you need to have that. You need to have that as a starting point. Is one of the key items that I would say you use to get started.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of firms that I've noticed this in payroll. They will start off sort of wanting to be, air quotes, transformed payroll, right? We want to, transform our payroll, but they don't really know what that actually looks like or what they actually want in the end. I
Yeah.
think, again, they just think, oh, it's this technology, and that's all we need to do, right? We're going to buy this thing, we're going to put it in. It's a silver bullet, and we're there, and it's just not the case, right? So let's
Yeah.
maybe talk about
Let's.
some of the key ingredients, right? That
Yeah.
you have to have in transformed state, right? You've got the roadmap, you've got your exec buy-in, let's say, and you're off and running, right? I think there's, it goes back. It's a little maybe cliche, but it goes back to what we were all taught as anyone working in and around HR, right? You have to have people, you have to have process, right? Leading practice design, and you have to have technology. So
Yeah.
let's maybe break those
What
down, right?
Yeah, how
If you
about
don't,
we start
yeah,
with let's finish up with tech, since we've mentioned it a few
yeah,
times.
yeah,
That's where people start, is on the enabling side. I believe that's definitely the case. In fact, as you know, as an advisor, I work mostly with client and different client journeys. And I would say over half of the client journeys that I work with start with a laser focus on technology. As you
yeah,
mentioned, they just want to deploy, they want to get to the cloud, they want to deploy automation, whatever the technology is. They're solely focused on technology. And maybe that's because it can be the easiest to define and get funded, honestly.
yeah.
But then the other half of clients that are taking a journey will combine tech and service delivery right from the start, and they recognize that those two things go hand in hand. I wanted to share, just the magnitude of the impact that can have. So I worked with a client who started out defining their tech journey,
Hmm.
and as we talked about transformation, they added the people and the process components, right?
Ah,
The other components. And the project went from, 1/3 of the overall project was the tech component, and 2/3 of it was the delivery component. So, it just, for my mind, that's just the magnitude of the tech is important. You need it as an enabler, but the rest of the process and the people and the activity that has to transform is, potentially 2x as much effort to get to the right place.
yeah, absolutely. And I see a lot of firms, they take on this technology, and, sometimes I'll even see where they will kind of ding the technology, and I'll start to look and I go, well, some of their answers previously don't really line up. And I'll start to dig and look a little bit. And what you'll find is they oftentimes don't actually adapt to that technology, right? They don't adapt to the leading practice design, right? The modern way of doing things, so to speak. They try to hold on to these old ways, or prevent, I've actually seen organizations who deploy the latest HCM, right? I won't say the name, put in the latest HCM, and then they had all these poor scores from mobile. When I unpacked it, they actually didn't use it. They really didn't even adopt it. They had
Yeah.
just done a
Yeah.
couple of use cases, maybe pay slips or time entry or something, but they really didn't fully engage that for their people. They were afraid their people would be upset, or they would revolt. They're gonna flip out. But the reality of it is that people do want, and if you communicate and explain the why behind things, I think they do want to be empowered, right? Most of us, I mean, listen, we're all living on our mobile phones, right? Why shouldn't the capabilities that we have at home be available to us at the workplace? And why would you think that an employee wouldn't want that? I know it is generational. I know there's plenty of research around that, but the reality of it is that the technology today is really designed such that, there are multiple channels of engaging with it, and whether that be mobile or desktop or whatever. But the fundamental thing is, I think a lot of firms sort of stop short of actually utilizing the full power of the technology, right? And really moving themselves around the tech versus trying to move the tech around themselves. And I think that's one of the mistakes. In addition to thinking that it's going to be the silver bullet, which it just isn't.
Right.
So yeah. And so that leads us to, I think, the next most critical piece here, or one of the more critical pieces, and that is the process part of this, right? And again, I think you have a lot of organizations that try very hard to hold on to past ways and past practices. And sometimes those practices and ways made sense at the time that they were put into place, or that, they acquired something and that's just what came with it. But the reality of it is you've really got to, you can't automate the bad stuff, right? You can't automate what you've been doing. You really need to create a machine-enabled sort of straight-through processing capability that is sculpted around leading practice design. And I think too many folks try too hard to hold on to the ways that they've done things, and it is to a detriment, or at least it is to an ill effect. But what are your thoughts on process around that whole concept, and how important it is to the to pairing with the technology?
Yeah, so I think, there's probably two buzzwords, that have floated around process for quite some time now. The first is end to end, which is certainly important, and the other is best practice, right? Best practice processes, and everyone is aiming for those couple of things. But when I think about process and changing processes and looking at processes, I think about that both, as a grandiose concept, or on the big size. You have to harmonize. We're talking about configuring, not customizing, so you can get to SaaS. We're talking about doing that at a global scale, right? That's kind of the big process with a big P. And then, there's also the, more detail oriented incremental process with a small P, maybe, where we're talking about improvements. We're talking about redesigning, clarifying, automating, and both of those play a part in a transformation. I think there's just as much risk, you mentioned, and I do see it a lot as well, folks that try to recreate their old processes and new technologies. Yes. The flip side of that coin is the client that says, you know what, systems integrator or whoever is deploying or helping me deploy new technology, just give me all of the latest best practices or processes. And, they really don't take any time at all to figure out whether those work for them, whether they fit with their delivery organization. They just want to say, just give me all the best practices. And then, they're surprised when that doesn't work. Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So risks on both ends of the spectrum there, really.
Totally. Yeah. And, I think this is an area that I think a lot of organizations, you have to actually do a lot of work up front, right? You mentioned harmonization and standardization just as a baseline, right? A lot of folks aren't even to that level yet to be able to begin transforming or adopting to a leading practice or best practice design. And so one of the things I really like the way about the way we approach things at Alight is we do a lot of, we have a very strong pro services organization that helps organizations get ready for this, right? Are you ready? Do you have the people? Do you have are the processes standardized? Are they harmonized? How far off from ready are you to begin transforming? And I think that's a very key piece that probably gets probably gets overlooked a little bit, maybe, especially I've seen that in payroll a bit. People just want to storm off and start putting in that technology and start harmonizing and getting everything going. But it's best to sort of step back and assess where you are and where you're trying to get to. And then I think you can do a better job of kind of saying, okay, look, we're way off, or we're pretty close. We just need to do some things, and we can really, take ourselves to the next level. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of work to be done there. And then I think that kind of segues in, one thing I've stopped short of saying is change management, right? I think that's the other piece that is ultra critical in your process and in any of this. And that leads me to the third component, which is people, right? And I'll say it, people, people, people. You can't have enough emphasis. It really ought to be the first thing you talk about, right? People. Without people, you are not going, and the resources and skilled resources, right? You're not going to be able to get this done. And I think that a lot of times in these programs, a lot of people overload the people that are key to getting this work done, the subject matter experts they need to help them. And again, they skimp on the change management on the back end or even throughout. And that can't be overstated either, right? There's got to be a really good communication plan around this and a really good change management program to help make it happen. But tell me your thoughts on the people element of transformation, Julie, and what you see as far as the firms that are most successful, how they approach that part of it.
Yeah, so there's the individual people, and then there's the delivery model, right? And which people you have in which roles. And I think some of the reason that people is so important is that we see these changes. We see technology or self-service being pushed in. We see harmonization or changes to workflow and escalations as new processes are configured. But we don't see any change in the delivery model, or at least not the right amount of thoughtful and meaningful change up front. And so formally, we're not redefining how the individual HR organizations or people working in HR, how their jobs are changing to fit with the new environment, right? What should HR business partners be doing? How many do I even need? How do they work with a COE? What do they do? What are we doing in shared services? And how do we put more transactional support into shared services? And so the delivery model to me is, that's kind of your people roadmap, right? What's supposed to happen with my people, and how does that change? And how does the HR organization look different? And then there's the individual people side of things, right? So purposefully, looking at employees and managers and saying, what do we expect them to do now that they have self-service? And I think upskilling, right? We've both been in a world where upskilling was a big conversation starter along with change management that you mentioned. Like when your job is materially different and successfully reinvented, we actually cause disruption in the daily remit of the employee or the manager. And we need to work with that and figure out how we then upskill the employee base so that they and the managers and the HR folks are all, settling into new roles and doing things differently.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that brings up a great point, right? We're seeing more of the HR role, the traditional past role of maybe the administrative part of it anyway, pushed down to frontline managers, right? Their technology, the way it's sort of designed today with the analytics, with mobile, with sort of the frontline manager is really getting a lot more involved in HR. And I think you're right, that's where that change management has to really be robust. And so many companies skimp on that. And it drives me insane, because I'll be honest with you, in 30 years, I have worked, and you have too. I know I've advised. I have been behind the scenes of deals. I have worked on many, many, many different aspects. I have yet to come across an employer who comes to the table and says, we are bang up at change management. We are so good at it that we have, you know what I mean? Like it's just not their business, right? That's not what they do. And most organizations are not successful with it themselves. They need help. And I think that too many of them think that they can do it themselves, or maybe they think that they don't need it, or they can skip things. But I think that's where you almost have to double down, right? It is that change piece.
Well, it's a big line item in a budget when you're trying to get funding approved. And so And many times it does start out as, but when you come to the table and you need the actual funding approved, that's one of the first things that gets cut.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So maybe let's pivot a little bit towards, one of the questions I have, is how do you know if you're doing this right? How certainly you want to measure, right? Measure, refine, repeat, right? But how do you know that you're measuring it correctly? And my interpretation of that is you really have to be taking the pulse of the organization, I think, right? At the project level, at the program level, particularly at the people level, and maybe even incorporating some broader HR or excuse me, broader business data into that mix, right? So you can really assess this. But what are your thoughts on how do you know if you're doing it right? How do you know if you're on the right path?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, it is a path and a journey. So it's a little bit different tactic than just managing a project from, day one to day go live. And I think a big part of that measuring is setting up the right level of transformation office so that you
Okay.
are doing
Yeah.
those things, broader than any particular go live or any particular start date, and that you are following your roadmap, which will extend beyond a particular project or a project life. The other thing that I think comes into, are you ever really there, or how are we doing it? Are we doing it right?
Yeah.
In today's world, doing it right means you have accounted for, or you're able to address agility and innovation. Um, and things are not staying the same. Our world is very dynamic right now with technology leaps and with changes in talent. And so, having the ability to address innovation, to be agile, to shift and to shift your priorities and still accomplish wins along your journey like that's just critical today.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think there's value in benchmarking for organizations, either pre or post or pre? I think is probably good, but even during. I mean, what are your thoughts on benchmarking in terms of transformation? Keeping in mind, right? I think it's fair to say it's not something that is often linear for everyone, right?
Right.
Most organizations are not starting on the same base, if you will. They're not facing the same variables. Many of them are not in the same set of dynamics that are happening for them. But do you think there's value in benchmarking, and when and how do you think that plays into your program?
Yeah, so I do believe there's value in benchmarking, but I am one of those folks, like there's so many different ways to benchmark, Pete,
Yeah,
and I think that oftentimes when people go into benchmarks, they go into benchmarks being led into benchmarks by whoever it is they think will help them or has the benchmarks, right? So I did a session at our Niamo, early Q1
yeah,
area that unpacked a little bit the different types of benchmarks, but I think that's where people get into trouble with benchmarks. Just applying maybe not the right benchmark at not the right time. There's functional benchmarks, and those will give you, ratios and cost per stats. And they're really, made for broad comparisons about how I compare to who, right? Who am I even
yeah,
comparing myself to? Some quartile or, something that's best practice. So those have a role, and those, there's a place and a time for those. There's performance benchmarks, which are, specific measures about how many, how many transactions am I conducting? And those to me are really a flag for, has anything gone off the rails? It's an operational type of a benchmark, and they have a role also. The type of benchmark that I'm a big advocate of for service delivery, assessments and for transformation programs, and to try to figure out where you're going, are the cost of delivery benchmarks. And so
yeah,
here you're looking at data points that will support different strategic alternatives or technology choices. And so it's kind of the benchmarks that help light the way to your path in a transformation, and identify at a very high level what happens if I go down this path or if I go down that path.
yeah.
Um,
Modeling.
yeah, the
Yeah,
business case modeling that goes along with it, absolutely. So it's a tool that I use often at many different stages, whether it's upfront, assessment and roadmap design, whether it's to gauge where suppliers are coming in, whether it's to look at an existing relationship. These tools can be invaluable, but But picking the right benchmarks for the right situation to answer the right questions, that to me, is maybe a whole episode.
Yes, yes. No, I think there's a lot of offshooting episodes we could do here. I've been thinking of that, and we certainly will. That's what we're here for. But so maybe let's talk about a couple more things before we wrap up. Right? Are you ever actually there? I mean, do you think the transformation I mean, I believe it's more of a journey than a destination, right? I think you you certainly get to a transformed state, right? You go through that dramatic change, you go through that disruptive move. But I think you're always, I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek. I'm a big fan of the infinite mindset. I think you have to continuously be looking to not only improve, but progress, right? And evolve, right? That word again. What are your thoughts on that, right? In terms of just, are you ever really there? What's your thought around that concept?
Yeah, so I agree. It's big and it's a journey. I did mention, kind of some of the new dimensions that are coming into these transformation areas. Not only the agility and innovation, so that you can recreate or direct your journey as the circumstances dictate, or as your destination changes, or your
Yeah,
priorities, or your funding change.
and it may.
That's really, yeah, that's
It may.
really important. It usually does. These are multi-year programs usually. And then, just there are some new wrenches being thrown into these programs. There's some new priorities, and a couple of those that, if they're not on your existing roadmap, they should be, include experience, right? Experience is kind of a subset of its own, and focusing on not just the technology enablement, but then the experience is a dimension of a journey that many folks are adding right now. And the second dimension that is becoming really important in today's conversations are skills-based talent management, right? So the
Yes.
idea
Yes.
that, that we not only need to focus on bringing in the right types of hires, but we need to focus on giving our existing talent the right experiences, and using them more fungibly, and understanding and developing their skills, so that there's many different ways to have a career path or pathway. That's becoming that's a new part of the transformation journey that many companies are now starting to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. How about keys to success, Julie? What do you think are, we've talked about a lot of different things, right? Change management, good people, staffing your project, technology, right? Picking the right technology, I think, is important. We may not have emphasized that, right? Picking the technology that is going to meet not only your current use cases, your unique use cases, but also those that you expect to have, in the future. You want to buy for the future for sure. But what else, right? What do you feel like are the keys to success that we maybe didn't mention already that we should highlight here?
Yeah, well, for me, one of the big keys to success is just actually navigating a roadmap to something actionable.
Yes.
So, a lot of folks have, a lot of people have ambitions, right? They know where they want to go. It's usually something quite large and quite big. And then the question is, if you can't get some big whopper of a funding, what are you doing? What progress are you making toward that roadmap? Are you just checking boxes, or did you really, have you really done
Yes.
anything meaningful? An example that I like to toss out there sometimes is, when HR business partners, the whole concept of HR business partners came around, the idea is that they're performing a more strategic role to the business units,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And that was something very different than HR generalists who, kind of did a little bit of everything and a lot of transactional stuff. And I have in years yet to come into an organization that doesn't say we have HR business partners. And I'm like, really? Well, what are they doing? What exactly activities are they doing? And they're doing the same tasks as the HR generalists, where they just
Yeah.
renamed them. So
Yes.
have I really transformed anything, or did I just, wholesale change the label or the name of my HR generalist to HR business partners? Is an
That's a
example
great
of
point.
checking boxes and not really getting anywhere, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, yeah, you're right. I think again, it goes back to the whole I don't feel transformed, right? These are the things that are going to give that feeling, air quotes, if you will. So yeah, we could go on and on here, but before we wrap up, I just wanted to sort of, I run into so many companies, and I'm sure you do too, right? That go off off, and they're still operating on their old ways, right? They're old, they've got legacy technology. You ask them, what are they using for this or that? And it's like, well, we've got, modern recruiting, or we've got modern learning, right? And we've integrated it back to our on-premise, whatever. And so many are putting this off and kicking the can down the road. And I know some of the technology platforms have enabled that a little bit. Some of it is, a fear, right? Some of it is a lack of funding. Some of it is not being really, mature enough to be ready, I guess, for some of this stuff. But what are your thoughts on firms that are putting this off? And what do you think around why that can't be anymore, right? Like, what would you say to organizations that are kind of kicking the can down the road?
Yeah, so I agree with you. There's no putting it off anymore, right? But I don't actually feel like transformation has to be, this ginormous effort. The idea in transformation is you're trying to get somewhere very different, and you have a roadmap, and that roadmap is compiled of big and small things,
Yep.
that all lead in toward the direction. They all support this, purposefully aligned idea or vision of where you want to be. And there's these concrete steps. And so that actually makes it easier to say, I don't have to put this off, really.
Yeah.
I just need to make sure that if now is the time, or funding isn't there, or resources aren't there, whatever my constraints are, or my limitations are, then now is the time for me to choose one of those smaller things that still brings me in the direction of my transformed vision. And, maybe that's in the readiness area. When we talked about processes, we talked about, harmonization of processes and simplification. Those things need to happen, and they will happen as part of going into, let's say, a cloud suite.
Yeah.
So
Right.
if you don't have the funding for the cloud suite, then start with the, process transformation, or start with, a lot of folks don't realize how incredibly important it is when you move into a cloud technology to harmonize your workflows and your escalations. So, if every business unit is different, and some folks approve comp 1/1 and some folks approve comp 3/1, that becomes a challenge to deploy in a technology. And it's something, that's not easy to change in the organization. There are a lot of battles to fight, but you don't necessarily need big budgets and big project teams to work with something incremental that moves you in the direction of your overall strategic transformation.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, we said up front earlier that the outcome of HR transformation is dramatic, right? And generally not incremental, but you actually can, to your point, achieve a long-term goal with some incremental moves. And I think that one of the things that I love about the marketplace today is that tech and services for HR have become so modular, and so flexible, right? And so granular that you actually can bite off the pieces that make sense for your environment, right? Those that complement your strengths and your investments, and where you're doing well and where you're not, and can solve for solve your problems, if you will, at that time, right? And you're right. I think you can certainly make some progress. And I have seen organizations do it, right? To say, hey, we can't afford, or we're not ready for this big piece, but here we are going to go tackle this thing, and we're going to continue to make a little bit of progress, even though it's not the dramatic big HR transformation that we would like.
That's right.
So yeah, I think it's important.
In today's tech world, not only are there the big things that can enable technology, but we have all sorts of apps and APIs and tools and automation routines. And to me, the funnest part of being an advisor is helping a client figure out where, what is my roadmap? What's kind of the direction I want to move in, and then what is actionable that I can do, in steps to get myself materially to some place different. And so many tools and so many areas that you could focus, especially when you're not ready to tackle the big nut.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, I think there's a lot of firms that really, really, really have got to get going, and do something, because I think there's a lot of them that are going to get left behind, and they're not going to compete, right? They're not going to compete for talent. They're going to have a hard time being as agile and talent driven and data driven as they need to be in order to compete with their peers. So now's the time. And certainly, I think the beauty too of the marketplace is there's help, right? For folks like yourself and others that are out there helping organizations, even just helping them think through how to go about this and think about the things that they're not aware of. And, there's so much value in all of that. Right. So, yeah. So look, this has been a great episode, Julie. I mean, I know I always learn. I think it's given us a lot to go away and talk about for our future episodes, today. So great discussion as always. So look, before we wrap up, just want to point out, we have a big announcement, really before really ahead of time, right? We didn't think we would really be entertaining guests right away, but we have our first guest, Julie, coming up on our next episode. And I'm not going to reveal who that is. I know you know who it is.
I know you won't let me say, but soon enough.
Yes. I think everyone's going to love it. It's going to fit very nicely with the conversations we've had today and in the past, in our first few episodes. And I'm really looking forward to having this person on, and it's going to be exciting. So definitely stay with us.
Sounds great.
All right. Good
Till
deal.
next time.
Take care, Julie.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.